you hear us now? Okay, sorry about that. We're back.
I have no idea. No, I know where I was, but I don't know where we got lost here. So basically, Lincoln is pointing out at that point which areas were said to be in rebellion. And they're listed there. Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana. But notice this carving out here. Except all these particular parishes. There's like 12 or so parishes. So imagine this now in your mind. Okay. This would be like from where we're sitting now. Okay, Santa Cruz County is in rebellion, but Santa Clara County is not, and Monterey County is. So it's war within the war in terms of it's like in the craziness of this. And it just goes on and names them in, you know, in Mississippi, in Florida, and all of the rest of this, in West Virginia, in Norfolk, and all the rest. And we forget sometimes by using the terms North and South that it makes it appear like there's some big spatial differentiation. But Washington, D.C. is on the Mason-Dixon line, which means that Maryland, literally across the street, is a slave state. That Washington, D.C. itself was a slave territory. It's like the slaves built the White House and all of the rest of that. It wasn't considered a state. But don't get this idea of like Florida and New York, like the North and the South. It wasn't like that. It was like all right here. It was done expeditiously, but it didn't free everybody. And we have this idea of like the Emancipation Proclamation was this thing to end slavery. It wasn't. It was not to end slavery by any stretch of the imagination. It was politically expedient to try to break the economic backs, but it left all of the slaves that were not in rebellion still slaves. And we'll take this, I see your hand up, just take this one step further. What did happen when we actually, quote unquote, ended the institution of slavery? If you go back to that handout that we have there, it's down at the bottom. There you go there, where it says the amendment below. There you go. Can we get that full on the screen by any chance?
That's as full as it gets.
Okay, well that's almost all of it. You can see it from here. So
what you're talking about?
Yeah, the 13th Amendment is very short. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime wherefore the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction. So let's look at some of the nuances that happened there. The first big one is except as punishment for crime. Except as punishment for crime. So this starts right now, this legacy of people of African descent as criminals. This was this first morph then of slavery into the penal system. Because there was no restrictions against the forced servitude if you were convicted of a crime. So instead of freedom, what these new quote unquote freed slaves wound up with was the chain gang. Still doing the work, these trumped up charges. You have people who don't read, who don't know the laws or whatnot. I mean, they're being thrown in to prison, you know, left and right all over the place. losing their property or whatever, not paying their taxes. All these things are like reasons for incrimination. Are you with me? So
They didn't know the laws.
they didn't know. How are they going to know the laws?
They could be, and they could probably make up things. Oh, you broke this law.
You broke this law, and there's nothing that said that the laws had to be treated equally for the same people. So if you were, say later on when it got to voting, it's like, okay, if you could vote, you just go to register. But if you were black, you had to know the capital of every 50 states. You know, you had to know how many beans were in the jar. I mean, it's like all of these ridiculous tests and things that you would have to pass in order for you to be able to register to vote. The inequities were built in the system. They're built in the system, Russell.
Oh, white male juries.
Of course. Yes. Yes. And this notion even of the jurisdiction, and the notion of the jurisdiction, many people do not realize, but they call them like the 5 or the 6 tribes, the big Native American tribes, also had African slaves. They too had slaves, and those slaves were not freed by this declaration in the Constitution. And when they finally did get to be freed, the native tribes did not make them citizens of their tribal nations. So you had all of these people of African descent who were here in the United States who were literally out of luck. They were neither US citizens nor were they citizens of their tribal nations. And this idea of the or place subject under our jurisdiction. So I can be an American company and export my product to another country and have the slavery there that I can't have here because it's not under US jurisdiction. Are you with me? There was never the same kind of fervent manifesto that we had in the Declaration of Independence about, you know, all are created equal and are endowed by their creator. It wasn't so. It's like it wasn't so. So this notion that we have, as though that was a long time ago, or we ended it, we never did. Not only did we, and this is the part I want you to breathe on, not only did we never end all of that discrimination and marginalization against the people of the African descent and the natives and all the rest of that, that fundamental premise that came out clearly in the Dred Scott decision, that America was exclusively designed and supposed to be for the white race. That never changed either. It never shifted either. And a lot of this drama and rhetoric that we are seeing in the public arena today is still this stuff. Yes, this like make America great again and all the rest of that. It's like, let's get back to the day when America meant white. When America meant white. We know that all these other people like shouldn't be here and shouldn't be getting, you know, all these rights and these privileges and all and it's like, what the hell is going on? That there is in the collective psyche, which is part of my sermon on yesterday, about how we have never had the intent to have a pluralistic society. Now, the way it says it in my deepest intent, in my second volume, and I love the way it put it, it's a nuance. It said there is a difference between saying different kinds of people comprise America than to say America is comprised of many different kinds of people. The first way many different kinds of people comprise America is the melting pot theory. It's that people come from all these different places. And what has happened up until now is there has been this tacit, implicit, and explicit agreement on the part of immigrants, particularly the immigrants that were coming into the 20th century, to forego their history, their cultures, their religion, their language, and everything else, and become an American. And this idea of American also meant Anglo. Anglo. So Jewish people cut their names off. If you were Catholic, you started becoming Protestant. Everybody Anglicized their names. So even things like an actor, like an actor, Sheen.
Charlie.
Yeah, like Charlie Sheen. Okay. Now, his daddy, Martin Sheen, goes by Sheen, but Charlie Sheen's brother goes by their Hispanic name. Yes, Estevez. But you would find that all the time, where people would hide their heritage, pseudonyms as authors, or you know, I'm not Hispanic, I'm not Jewish, I'm not this, I'm not that. This way that everybody...
Still that way, when you want to become a citizen. My brother-in-law is from Italy. For the longest time didn't become citizens because they had to give up their Italian,
They had to give up their Italian names, you see.
not their names, they had to give up their citizenship,
Yeah,
say, denounce their...
Get up their citizenship,
where
denounce and all
If you're
that.
European, you have dual, you know, you can
Right.
be whatever.
Exactly. So if you're from certain countries, you can still be connected to those countries.
Like if you're from England, right?
Yeah.
I have some friends from England, but they have dual citizenship.
Right.
But that's recognized in England, it's not recognized here.
I know it's not.
In some countries it is.
Ireland.
Yeah, but it's this whole, can you see, it's like this whole mixture thing, and it still is true in our immigration laws about where you come from, and are you allowed to immigrate in or not immigrate in, and the closer you were to that profile of those original founding fathers, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, heterosexual, educated, English-speaking, adults, males with property. You know, all of those are socioeconomic statuses. And the closer that you are to that, the closer you were to having your freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because my great-grandparents came from Italy and Ireland on my mom's side, but on my Italian side, my grandmother did not teach my dad to speak Italian. And I remember asking him, why don't you know how to speak Italian? Your grandparents were living in the house and they were Italian. He's like, because my mom said we had to be American. Yeah, we could not speak Italian. We had to be American.
Right. And this is basically what everybody was doing. Now, in the past few decades, all that's changed. That has really, really changed. Where people coming into America are not as quick to denounce their backgrounds. They're not as quick to denounce their heritage. They're not as quick to give up their language or to give up their religion to become this homogenized wasp. And it's considered anti-American.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
No, it's considered anti-American to not become white,
Right.
to not like melt into
Learn English.
that. Yeah, learn English.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Learn. That one kills me.
Why
Especially
do I have to press something if I don't speak English? You should learn English.
particularly in California.
With all the Spanish.
That makes me crazy. I remember seeing etched in an elevator in the parking lot at Kaiser Cadillac in Los Angeles. And it said, speak English, this isn't Mexico. And I thought to myself,
Well,
well, in La Ciudad de Los Ángeles, maybe. But if you can feel what I'm saying now, that this climate that we're in, it didn't come out of nowhere.
It's strange.
It's been this way.
Yeah, because I'll put it this way, I didn't understand. When I became president of the Women's Federation Club, I did not know it was all Republican. And my friend set me up in this thing. She knew it, but I didn't know it, right? So I asked the lady, a lot of people resigned. I think when I came president. And one really was a lifer. She really could. So she resigned. I couldn't understand why. But I did ask a friend of mine. I said, well, the Italian, I asked a friend of mine, I said, did you ever belong to the Women's Federation Club in Santa Cruz? He said, no, I'm Italian. They did not let us. And this is just recent. I Reverend said, this is just recent. I came in 2006, and there were no, I said, really? So I was shocked. I'm still learning a lot. I was shocked, and when I went to other counties, they were just in awe that they had a black president that was a Democrat. I said, really? I said, you guys not supposed to discriminate according to this thing. But I was just in shock because I was in awe that they didn't have no other nationality.
No.
And I was in shock, and they was in shock with me sitting up there being president too. But anyway, I was just in awe, just here in Santa Cruz. I'm not talking about outside of Santa Cruz. I'm talking about in Santa Cruz. They were the lady completely quit. She couldn't stand it. She completely resigned, and she was a lifer.
Exactly. Even within the race white, there are ethnicities. So Anglo-Saxon is the English-German strand, and that was put higher than everybody else. So it's this successive supremacy within supremacy of supremacy. What was slightly different, though, in the Constitution is that the indentured servants, so if you came over here from Hungary or the Italians or the Germans and whatnot, you might have been an indentured servant, which meant you served for 7 years. You weren't exactly a slave, but you were an indentured servant, but it was recognized that you would be free. So in the Constitution, the way that it's written, and I meant to bring that, it's just one sentence. It says, those who are free or will be free. You're considered like one whole vote. You're recognized in the sentence as one whole person. Those who are free or will be free. Those who are of native, you're nothing. You don't count for anything. And it says, and then all other persons, which they didn't say slaves particularly, but it meant like everybody else who wasn't native and who's never going to be free. They're going to be 3/5. They're going to be 3/5. And I want you to feel that I'm not trying to get you to be an expert on like old American history. It's to understand the foundation, the climate, the urgency, the kind of pissosity,
It's still
about
so
all of this.
recent. I mean, my Irish mother in the 50s, when she told her parents that she would met an Italian, they asked if was he some kind of immigrant? And even though both their grandparents came at the same time, but because he was Italian and they were Irish, he was an immigrant and they weren't.
Yeah.
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 I know, it's crazy.
And that
I'd
was
like
not
to
long
bring it
ago.
up to date, because there was a study over the weekend by the Gallup people, and they studied 87,000 voters in America. And what they were trying to determine was the basis for Trumpism, not Trump, Trumpism, which is the America propaganda. And it's not economic, it's cultural. The root of it is culture. And we've been led to believe it's economic, and it's just not true.
No.
It's that old culture.
It's the culture. And seeing the reason why it's so important that we understand that it's the culture is that after the end of slavery, there was this little window period called Reconstruction. This little window period where there actually started to be some progress. We actually started to see African people of African descent beginning to be able to make some businesses and starting to get positions in the legislature and whatnot. And then there was an election when Harris got elected. And he was a Republican, and it was a very closely contested vote. And a pact was made between the Republicans and the Democrats. And the Republicans said, if you give us the White House, we will give you Southern Democrats the South back. We will pull out our troops, and you can have your way in the South. And what they did is they set up these whole string of laws called Jim Crow to essentially recreate slavery without the actual slavery. So it was just restriction after restriction after restriction after restriction. And basically the US government said, we'll give you free reign and we won't protect, and you can do anything that you want to do. But the restrictions, and it relates to what we're talking about now, the restrictions were not just against the Black people. The restrictions were also against the white people. Not just the Black people, but the white people. In order to keep people apart, they both have to agree to stay apart. So to make sure that the poor Irish didn't hook up with the new freed Blacks in their sharecropping, because mind you here, the ones with all the skills were Black. The ones who knew how to run everything and do everything were Black. And if they really could be successful, we're going to have problems here because we don't know what we're doing. No, I'm really, it's like I'm really serious here.
You can see that.
Jack Daniels is just coming out with this, as they're doing their big celebration and whatnot, and they're just coming out of the closet that their recipe and their early stuff was taken from a slave and his son. He had the recipe and all of the rest of that, and they learned the trade or whatnot from him. It's like, this is the way that it was, but it became based upon culture. See, then it became based upon culture. And what Jim Crow did, and this is what's happening with this Trumpism, is it said, you may be poor, but you're better than them. So it duped them so that they couldn't see that they were just as oppressed. So the poor white people couldn't see that they were just as oppressed as the poor Blacks. And these laws kept them apart, so that the price that you would pay would be anything that would have happened to a Black person would have happened to a white person. So if you disobeyed the integration laws and you tried to hook up with the Black person, the cross was burned on your lawn. You kept everybody in line by the same fear.
Separation.
Are you with me?
Yes.
The separation, the same fear, but it was cultural. That's why we have to understand this is cultural. If we think of it as just the economics and whatnot, we're going to miss it, because economically it makes no sense.
So Trump's
Why is
trying
the
to
poor
separate it.
blue collar? Why is the poor blue collar following a billionaire?
Actually didn't start.
It's not on economics.
You can't make it, actually didn't start with Trump.
No, it's Trumpism.
Yeah, but you gotta remember, before Trumpism, there was,
It's no
David
nothing. It
Duke.
goes way back. It just has the name Trumpism today.
yeah,
But it's not from Donald Trump. He's just tapped into this cultural virus.
it started back before Trumpism came. It started with the Tea Party.
Started before
If
that.
you go
David
back,
Duke.
you keep on going, when they brought more out than when Obama came president. That's when they wanted to deny this whole thing not happening, because you got a black man that's coming president, now he's over us. That's when they couldn't accept, I'm just gonna put it like it is. They couldn't accept him being a leader. That's when Mitch McConnell went into that. When he came president, that's when they all got together saying, if you look at those Southern folks, they all got together and said, no, we can't accept any law that he passed. And it's coming with that, like Deborah said, it's coming with that, with this,
Yes.
with this stuff here that go. Well, my dad told us, and my relative, we had a slave. Matter of fact, they did not agree with us. That he justified the law, and he was branded, and he was wanted dead alive in Mississippi. So we had to go prove that to our folks. We went to the county to prove they got his number, they got everything that he was branded with. And my dad kept saying that, and everybody didn't believe. We said, okay, we're going to the courthouse. But sure enough, it was there in the courthouse that he was branded. He left, he ran away from his own. So we don't know whatever happened to him. He probably was killed, because he said dead alive. And all the rest of Mississippi. But this goes back to everybody, this goes back, way back, like you say, but the Tea Party really brought it more out. So Trumpism started with the Tea Party. Trumpism is trying to carry on what the Tea Party was sort of about.
It's a reaction. And this is not about candidates.
No, right.
This is about social change and process and how it works.
That's correct.
For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For every step of progress, there is a backlash. Okay, this is why, part of the reason why we're here, that we don't think of progress as linear, and to realize that every time we get any kind of step somewhere, there's going to be a backlash. And progress has to include how do we negotiate with and help the transition with the ones who are going to be impacted the most.
Yeah.
And that brings me to a really important question that I read all of the opinions on the Dred Scott case. It took all day Saturday.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And well, but what I noticed mostly is the irony of calling these people Mr. Justice, because they're all called Mr. Justice. and what the ones who were dissenting are saying is that this is without foundation in the law of nature to declare a human being as property. And yet the 5 opinions that were supporting it said this is not how things ought to be, it's how the law is. And how can they call themselves Mr. Justice when they're saying that it isn't about how things ought to be, what's fair? It's really just about the law.
Because that's the nature of the law. It's all, this is where we have these different branches, and this is part of the discussion now that's out there about the Supreme Court and the fact that we're going to have these empty positions. Okay? This is what's happening now, is that The accusation on the part of conservatives is that the Supreme Court justices have been acting on what they think ought to be. That they have been inserting their own morality and their own values, and that they have not been ruling just upon the law. Okay? So all this stuff that we're talking about with the Dred Scott, it is right here, right now. Same-sex marriage was like the last big go round about this, where what the Supreme Courts are saying is that no, that if you really look at the Constitution and look at the law, if the law really says that all rights should be for everyone in the state and you can't withhold certain rights, then you cannot withhold this from these people. They are looking at it as the law, but it's the exact same thing that's happened in the Dred Scott thing, where what's the law versus what makes sense and upon what basis. So we're in this loop-de-loop now about what's upholding the law and what's just and fair and makes sense in terms of the nation. It's the people that make the law. It's the people that make the law through getting their representatives and everything else, which is why I keep saying now, as a people, we got to make new law. As a people, we have to make a law emphatically that says we are a pluralistic society. Like it can't be left up to chance anymore. We can't even be about, is this just interpretation or not interpretation? We have to be so clear that says we are a country that respects everybody. We are a country that is interfaith and multi-faith and multiracial, that's who we are as a people. And if you look at what happens with law, is that you just do it enough that it becomes the law. It becomes the law because that's what's happening. Because it's kind of like when we used to talk about marriage, common law marriage. If you just do it long enough, you're considered married. That's why we, and I realize we're starting to run over now, like we have to be emphatic about the fact that we want a different kind of nation. That we don't want a nation that's just for one people or for one race. That we really do mean liberty and justice for all and have to say it. We've got to say it. We got to say it. I mean, which is why they started adding things like regardless of race or because without saying it, you couldn't actually tell. So we're at this new breaking point of the same stuff. It's just a different front. It's just a different arena. And now what's being put forth are two very different worldviews, regardless of what you think about the candidates. When you look at the platforms, it's very different worldviews. One is a worldview of this back to the Dred Scott decision, basically. And the other is, let's bust this thing wide open and start moving towards this more pluralistic society where we recognize that we are global citizens, where it's not just an English-only country, and that in fact, if you really look at it, they're saying we should model ourselves after some of the other more progressive countries. We should have universal health care. We should have education free all the way up through college, not starting at second grade. We should join the rest of the world. We should join the rest of the industrialized modern world and catch up, not be separate and distinct and have our own way of doing things that's out of step. Like with the rest, and out of step with the rest of the world. These are very different visions of a world. Okay? And, you know, we're here to be able to understand it enough so that we're not overwhelmed by it. And what I invite you to do is to read, there is a spirit letter some of you may not have the book, Your Deepest Intent. So there's some copies of it, but there is a letter called Divine Design. There's a letter called Divine Design. And I would like for you to take a look at that, and we're going to go over that next time. We're going to get off of the historical documents and start weaving back into the spiritual underpinnings of all of this, and where do we go from here? Who do we have left on virtual? Did they all come back?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't see them. Who do we have besides?
Well, they're, aside from Elizabeth, they're all on the telephone.
Okay, so let's check in to see any of the people on the telephone, because we haven't pulled them in yet. If you're on the telephone and you're in a position to speak, I know not everybody is in a position to speak when you're on the phone. Unmute yourself and speak up. We have a 310 number. There's a 678.
A day.
A day. I know he said he was driving. Unmute yourself if you can. Well, I may not be able to. Yes, coming in. Elizabeth, did you want to say any more?
Am I on? Yeah.
Yes.
Just not shocked, because it all makes sense why we're living in the world we're living in. It makes completely sense. And I believe someone else is want to come in too. I can do that later. Okay.
Good. All right. Good. And you know, and as you'll see, it's like I'm using the United States, but this process goes on everywhere. The groups may change, who's in position of power, whatnot, but this way of managing things and doing things is like protocol. This is just a case study. It's not so much about the U.S. as it is a case study of how we get out of oneness. Is there anybody else that wants to?
Nobody else is coming in.
That wants to come in? Okay. So be sure to read the letter. We'll make sure that we get an excerpt of it so that people who are calling in or whatnot can do that. We've gone a little deep into these past, these past few weeks here, and I want to thank you for hanging in there, with that. I'd like to throw it back open again and see if we can't get our virtual community back participating more. If you want to tell your friends about it, even suggest that they, might read that letter. We want to get back into the spiritual oneness aspect of it. But unless you know what you're up against, you can't figure out what you have to do. So is there anything else anybody wants to say in closing about this, Callie?
Yeah, I wanted to say that we need to set a precedent, because most laws, at least in our system, are based on precedent. And because of this Dred Scott case, we need to set a precedent.
Elizabeth's asking how we get to oneness.
Hello?
Oh, Ade?
Yeah, yes. I don't know if you can hear me. It's very noisy here. I'm in downtown Atlanta.
No, we hear you.
Okay, good. I've been sort of in and out in the conversation, so there's some things I missed. But I wanted to just share this for those who are participating. I was reading Rev D's Your Deepest Intent this morning, the chapter on divine design. I strongly recommend that those of us participating in this training call to read it, because things just got so clear for me. And what I found in that letter, Divine Design, it just, it grounded everything that I'm learning in the call. And also, to speak of the letters from the infinite, what I find with those letters, it has a way of softening my heart and my mind to really grasp it. Because when we talk about racism and discrimination, it's so easy to get so caught up in the pain and the sadness and the anger of it that we can't even tap into love. So if you don't have the book, if you have the book and you don't have, if you don't have it, get it. If you have it and you haven't read Divine Design, or just go read it again. Because what I learned from it is it helps me see that yes, we can see what's going on in the world and be sad about it, but it's much more important to hold the vision for what we want. Now, not just holding the vision, but be the vision. We're not trying to get anywhere. We're trying to be it. So if we're upset about what happened in the past and how could anybody ever do that? Well, clearly we know it should be another way. We need to start living that now, not later on, not next year, not depending on what happened during the election. We need to start being the beloved community now.
Yes.
That's all I got to share.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Actually, he was the one that texted me this morning and suggested that particular letter. I was going to start recommending letters anyway, so that was just perfect. I didn't even have to bother to look it up. Spirit just gave me that before I got out of bed. I want to commend everybody for hanging in here in some really hard stuff, and I recognize that. Just think of it as an anatomy, like an anatomy of the ism, an anatomy of like how this stuff works. Then you get to see more of like what we're up against.
I was wondering if at some point maybe next time we could talk about how fear has been generated in white people because of all of this gone down.
Well, yes, and
what component?
Well, yeah, but what you got to remember when you say that fear has been generated, the basic thing, there's just two things to remember, because it doesn't matter like who or what. One is that people fear karma. People fear payback.
Yeah.
When it's turned, they don't want to be in that position for one iota. I notice where I see it a lot, believe it or not, is in prison. Is in prison. And this notion, this fear that men have of going in prison and being raped. Like they don't want to be on the other end of all that masculine, violence and whatnot. It's like they know. So there's a fear of payback. That's one. And two, the way you keep these isms going is that you flip it. That if you talk about it as the victim, villain, hero triangle, that instead of you being the villain, you portray yourself as the victim. It's revisionist history. One of the candidates in particular is just a master of this. That no matter what it is that's said, the discussion always turns back to how this candidate portraying that they're a victim. Mm-hmm. And it's masterful. Like that's just the way that you do it. You play the game. The fear comes, you're afraid it's going to happen to you. You know what you've done and you're afraid it's going to come back. This is why I know why we're afraid of nuclear war. Because we're the ones that did it.
Yeah.
We know what can happen.
Yeah.
Okay? That and flipping it so that you make yourself the victim. And that's the way this goes. That's the name of the game.
And there's also an attitude of why do we have to pay for the crimes of our forefathers? Like people. Well, I don't feel that way.
I got all that. We'll talk about that next week, but it's not paying for the crimes. It's that we live in a system.
Right.
It's not a past crime. Nobody's paying for a past crime. It's what's going on. It's like it's what's going on today.
Yeah.
And there's far less. I'm not trying to get anybody to teach U.S. history to people or whatnot. But if there can be a little bit of compassion for the fact that the whole world as they knew it is over, is changing. And that's the fear. You know, it's like this unknown and whatnot. It just, if you know it, it becomes our job to shepherd people through it. It's the burden and it's the responsibility of change agents, if you really want change, is to help the other people change. It's to help them change. I know what I'm talking about. You know, the feminist movement, we had to work with men about what does this mean when the whole definitions of masculine and feminine are going to shift. We got to work with this. Every woman was having to work with this. You know, working this out with the man so he can still feel like a man, even if he's going to do some dishes and you might make more money. I mean, it's like, what, you know, how is this going to work out? You know, in the South, the white people, the black people had to work with the white people. You know, how do we let you still be white? Because you're going to wind up giving up all your privileges. If you're helping me out too much, how can I negotiate so that you can still be in your family and not get your house burnt down? You got to work. It's like you got to work with it. You got to work with it. And I just contend that instead of trying to separate out from the people who are different from us, let's say that we are all one. Let's help find a way to go together.
Amen.
That's it. Okay. All right.
Thanks, Missy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. It was so clear in your